Thank you for taking time out to look at this very important issue. We want to look at one of the claims made often by the homosexual community, namely that if things like homosexual marriage and adoption rights go into law, it won't have an impact on everyone else. This is actually not the case. In fact, I've been following this now for quite some time, both in America, where I originally come from, and then later Europe and now Australia. It's quite clear whenever special rights are granted to the homosexual community, especially marriage rights, everybody is impacted. We all have a negative impact if you're concerned about faith, family freedom, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. All of these can be and are negatively impacted by special rights for homosexuals. In fact, we see an almost ongoing assault on some of these values of freedom of conscience, freedom of speech. Examples are so numerous that I've now actually categorized some 150 to 200 different examples just in the last couple of years of how people are losing their jobs often, being fined, sometimes even being thrown in jail for disagreeing with the agenda, for saying, even simply stating, marriage is between a man and a woman. So we see this happening really on a daily basis now, and we have to be warned about what's been happening overseas and what will likely happen here if we go through with this. So the truth is, while the homosexual lobby insists that nothing will impact anybody else when it comes to this area, everybody actually is. Our rights do get targeted, our freedoms do get challenged, and there's so many to choose from. We're just going to give you a very small sampling of some of these rights. And again, we know whenever governments give special rights to a minority group, of necessity, there will be corresponding duties and obligations. Others will have to go along with, support, and endorse these rights, and those who are hesitant to do so will often be seen as denying those rights and will face really the full thrust of the law. And again, we see many examples of this occurring. The agenda to promote special rights for homosexuals really does have an impact on the rest of us. And if you're one of those who've lost your job, been heavily fined, or even put into prison, you know full well that these special rights have an impact on the rest of society. So we simply want to look at a number of examples going back. I'll bring it right up to today. So roughly in chronological order, a very small sampling of many that could be mentioned, but simply looking at how special rights for homosexuals, including marriage rights, really do impact severely on the rest of the community. So let's begin with a case here from the UK. Here's simply a grandmother who was concerned about a very in-your-face gay pride march going right past her own street. She mentioned it to the police, offered a complaint, and the police, in fact, turned around and said, this is a case of hate speech. If you, again, make this kind of complaint, we will have to charge you with the crime of hate speech. So incredible, simply worried about this kind of very in-your-face, you know, often full of nudity march going past her own home. The police said, you are the one who has to bite your tongue and not make us think about this. Another example, again, this time from Scotland. A preacher was simply on the streets talking about the gospel, and he was asked a question about homosexuality. So he simply mentioned what the Bible says about the issue of homosexuality. A complaint was made. He was brought before the courts, and as you can see, a £1,000 fine was levied against him, simply to answer a question as to what Scripture says about the issue of homosexuality is now going to risk you getting fined in many countries. In America, again, the state of Georgia, here was a grad student simply told that because of her beliefs on homosexuality, she would have to undergo a remediation program, kind of a re-education. You're thinking the wrong thoughts. We don't accept this here at the Georgia University. You need to get your thinking straightened out because your beliefs on homosexuality are unacceptable. Another couple back in the UK, they've been fostering children for decades, whole range of kids that they've looked after and loved and brought into great citizens in the UK. Now a court has just told them, sorry, you can no longer adopt children. Why? Because of your views on homosexuality, because they don't agree that marriage is between two men or two women. The courts have said this is unacceptable. You're actually harming children to speak against this. So this great loving couple who's for so many years helped so many children, they too are now unable to adopt any longer. Here's a case in the U.S. of an Army chaplain, disciplined, in fact threatened with suspension, simply, again, because of his views on homosexuality. In fact, the Army is now saying any chaplain who takes a contrary line on the issue of homosexuality, they will be disciplined. They will be dismissed simply for affirming, again, marriage between a man and a woman. Here's a high school teacher in the state of Florida in America. He's simply, quite outside of his own role on Facebook, criticized homosexual marriage. The school found out about it. He too is looking for a new job, fired simply because of a PC belief in marriage, or in this case a non-PC belief. He's out of work on the unemployment lines. Student in Texas, Fort Worth, Texas. Here was a high school student. He was suspended from class, not for stealing, punching out somebody, sexual assault, simply making a comment on the issue of homosexuality, which again was not politically correct. He was suspended from his own high school. Case from Sweden. To criticize homosexuality can result in you being thrown into jail. In fact, we know of one pastor who did just that on a Sunday morning, spoke on the issue, at least indirectly, of homosexuality. A complaint was made. He was put into jail. And the European Rights Court has said, yep, that's absolutely fine. If somebody criticizes homosexuality, they should be put in jail. So the Human Rights Court in Europe found no problem with that whatsoever. So another case, freedom of speech being violated, religious freedom coming under threat. Here's a case in Canada, Calgary, a fellow simply handing out pamphlets on the issue of homosexuality, critical of the lifestyle and homosexual marriage. He was arrested, and in fact he was threatened with being put in a psychiatric ward simply for affirming his views in public. It's getting to the case where all around the Western world, to speak in public your views on homosexuality, if it doesn't line up with the reigning ideology, you can be threatened with arrest, you can lose your job, even threatened with being put into a mental institution. So when the activists say, none of this will impact you, none of this will, you don't have to worry about it, you should be getting the message by now that, hey, we all do have to worry about it. There's a case again in Scotland where the Gideons who give out Bibles, the police have said we can no longer accept Gideon Bibles. Why? Because the book speaks about the issue of homosexuality in a negative light. Therefore, the police have said we cannot have this. The Bible is a homophobic book full of hate speech. Sorry, unacceptable, at least for the Scottish police. Here's a Christian blogger in the United Kingdom. He is now under investigation simply for posting blogs about the issue of marriage. In fact, he simply wanted to run a pro-marriage ad on his website. And for that, the activist came out, complained, and he too is facing the heavy arm of the law for not running with the reigning ideology. Denmark in Europe, a case of homosexual marriage now being legalized, and the churches there told they must perform homosexual marriage. And there's no opting out, no optional extras here. This is now legal. Therefore, as I said before, whenever there's a right, there are corresponding obligations and duties. And in this case, even Christian churches who may be opposed, they will be forced to perform such marriages, whether they like it or not. Case in the UK, I believe, schools will be forced to teach about homosexual marriage. Again, the same thing. You make a right for something, everybody else will be forced to comply and go along with it. So in this case, school children, even as young as kindergartners, will be forced to learn all about homosexual marriage, will be taught that it's proper, normal, acceptable. This sounds to me more like indoctrination, propaganda than education, but that's what happens whenever special rights are granted. Everybody else must get on board or face the music. Here's a case back in New York. In addition to the 12 or so countries that have legalized homosexual marriage, there's a handful of American states that have also gone down this path. New York is one. And here already, a Catholic institution is being forced to recognize homosexual marriage or face the music. So a lesbian couple, again, has taken a lawsuit against this institution. And contrary to what the activists have said, every church will be affected. Every believer who takes a different view will be affected, even those in areas other than directly having to do with marriage, they too will be negatively affected. Here in Canada, Ontario, a Christian minister is now being told he must conduct homosexual marriages or you're going to get the sack as well. So Church of Christ minister can't even uphold his own beliefs, his own conscience, his own faith. He must go along with the PC law of homosexual marriage or get the sack. Back in France, which of course another recent country to legalize homosexual marriage, this example took place just before the bill was passed, but the justice minister there said there will be no freedom of conscience allowed. If this goes through, as it now has, you must perform homosexual marriage and we will not make allowance for conscientious objection. So again, everything changes when homosexual marriage gets through. There is no freedom to disagree. There's no options out. You go along with it or you face the penalty. Here's a university student who's facing, in fact, a staff member in Maryland who simply had, on her own time, signed a petition at church about the issue of homosexual marriage. The university found out about it, and now the staff member is being punished by the school. You can't even, in your own time, sign a petition according to your own beliefs without there being very serious ramifications, in this case with the university. Here's a judge in Hamilton in Canada saying basically parents do not have a right to know what their own children are being taught in school. In this case, homosexual activists came in, gave them their spiel about the homosexual agenda, and the judge actually said, you're free to do this and parents should be kept in the dark. They don't have to know what's going on. Your kids can be exposed to any number of agendas, and parents don't even have the right to know what their own children are being taught in school. So again, special rights will impact everybody else. France has warned Catholic schools cannot stay neutral when it comes to the issue of homosexual marriage. Imagine that. Even Catholic schools have to go along with the government idea that marriage is now open slather to whoever wants it, to say that it's just between a man and a woman, as per official Catholic teaching, that is now taboo in France. Pastor in America, fairly famous pastor, Louis Giglio, he was invited to give a prayer at the inauguration of Obama just late last year. However, some homosexuals discovered that 20 years earlier he had actually given a sermon in which he talked about homosexuality. They made a big stink, complained to the White House and said, you cannot have a pastor like this giving a prayer at the inauguration because of something he said 20 years ago. So he has lost his chance to give a prayer simply because of his biblical views, his own views on homosexuality. Now, the UK, we're being told that as many as 40,000 teachers may face the sack over the issue of homosexual marriage. Because that country has just recently legalized it, any teacher who may feel uncomfortable or for reason of conscience not want to go along with it, well, tens of thousands may be looking for new work. Canada, again, it said a Christian group which is working actively overseas, for example, running food and hydration programs, improving access to clean water in nations like Uganda. This ministry, this organization, may lose all government funding simply because it believes marriage should be between a man and a woman. So it seems the Canadian government would rather have people starving and going without clean drinking water in African nations, because the host group helping them may have the wrong view on marriage. Canada, again, the Supreme Court has recently said those who oppose homosexual marriage and behavior are guilty of hate speech. This is a new hate crime which you will be punished by the state if you simply think in a fashion contrary to the current beliefs. Here's another case of gay activists preventing somebody from speaking at this was in America, the National Day of Prayer. Greg Laurie, another famous American pastor, he was meant to speak there, but because of his views on marriage and family, they said he should not be allowed to speak at the National Day of Prayer. So again, everybody will be targeted, everybody will be impacted if you take a contrary view than that of the activists. Another case, New Zealand. Here's a pro-family activist, has a pro-family ministry, and simply because of his views on traditional marriage and family, he has been deregistered as a charity in New Zealand. Again, same story. Governments legalize something, in this case homosexual marriage. What follows, invariably, anybody who disagrees will face the full force of the law if they don't go along with it. So he has just lost his charitable status, simply affirming what everybody always has until recently when it comes to marriage. Here's a chaplain facing punishment for simply calling homosexuality a sin on Facebook, right? On his own private Facebook page, saying that it's a sinful behavior. He is now facing punishment for doing so. These are just a small sampling of many, many hundreds of examples all over the West. We're seeing people losing their jobs, heavily fined, sometimes even put in jail because they don't go along with the homosexual agenda. They actually believe marriage is between a man and a woman. For that, we can face all kinds of negative repercussions. So the question is, what can we do about this? Well, obviously in Australia, we should not be looking at legalizing homosexual marriage. We have seen clearly all around the rest of the world, when this happens, it's bad news for pretty much everybody else. There are glimmers of hope. Consider the case of France. As in so many of these countries where it goes through, it's often a handful of judges or politicians who decide this. The masses don't, the people don't decide on it, but activist judges and politicians make the rulings instead. So in France, twice now in the past year, there have been massive people power rallies, 1.4 million French men and women taking to the streets of Paris and elsewhere saying, we do not want homosexual marriage. The well-being of children especially is at risk. So there's been a real backlash in what is often regarded as a fairly left-wing, secular country. The people are fed up with the way the elites are forcing their agenda on the rest of the population, and they're beginning to speak out. So plenty of places like this around the world where people are saying enough is enough. We are tired of this agenda being forced upon us. So there is a war going on here. There's a war over faith, family, and freedom. Our very freedoms, the very thing we value, are very much at risk. It's funny, we're accused often of things like the witch hunts of old. Well, you could almost say that the whole homosexual agenda has become the new witch hunt. Those who don't go along with homosexual marriage and all the rest, they are the subject of a new and really fierce witch hunt. So free speech is being lost. We're losing our rights to freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion. All of this is now greatly at risk because whenever homosexuals get special rights, including marriage rights, we all face negative impacts. So we can ask, why has this happened? Why is all this taking place? Well, too many people haven't been speaking out. We need to speak out. We need to warn. We need to look at what's happened elsewhere and say, hey, this is a real threat. Freedom is too valuable to just give up without a fight, so that we must do. For those of a religious persuasion, the words of Bonhoeffer always come to mind here. Silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. There is a real concentrated effort to silence the churches and all those who disagree with the homosexual agenda. Now is not the time for complacency or silence. We must speak out. We must affirm our freedoms, our rights to religion, conscience, speech, because without that we have nothing. So I encourage you not to go down the path that so many other nations have gone down. It's been bad news. It's been a threat to many others. Freedoms are at risk. So we must stand strong. We must not only affirm the importance of marriage and family, but say no to those who would take away our freedoms.